when we think about Africa, first thing that comes in my mind is diversity because we used to treat like if it was one country and it's more than 50s. From the lens of the great media, the mass media, the television where you work, how is the key to address different contents and realize that you're talking to different cultures to different cultures? How? I mean, it could be a hard work, but probably you know how to do it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. Obviously, for CNN, we broadcast around the world, and there's a bunch of different cultural norms and expectations that might be different place to place. So we're heavily reliant on people with local expertise to understanding and making sure that we're not making mistakes.
And you think it's feasible for a great network to reveal that sometimes subtle difference in the field working like this?
Well, I mean, for instance, there can be just different norms, for instance, in Southeast Asia than there could be in the US, than there could be, even when you think about offensive language, there's certain words that are very offensive in US English that are not offensive in British English.
Yeah, for sure.
So, it's, we try to speak to a broad English speaking audience on our English channel. And then, of course, our other channels in different languages. But we try to make sure we understand something about the local context so we're not making mistakes.
Yeah. And you work with a lot of different countries. Sometimes it's easier for us as journalists, as I'm saying because I'm a journalist, to check out what's going wrong and report it. But we know about the potential of Africa too. I mean, I was talking to a Kenyan guy. Kenya is a country with a lot of innovation and technology. How can we report also the opportunities and the potential to help the continent to grow?
So we have a number of different shows specifically looking at exactly what you're talking about, potential. So we have Marketplace Africa, and we have another show called African Voices, which is looking at innovators and people who are doing things differently. I think also when we think about journalism broadly, the concept of solutions journalism is really important because it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can still tackle difficult problems, but you can also do so from the perspective of people who are making a change. So, climate change is an excellent one. Or I produced a documentary taking a look at a group of men who were trying to solve some of the problems of mass incarceration in the United States. So I think this is an opportunity for journalism because, there can be kind of a feeling of burnout when all of the stories are negative.
Yeah, I understand. And do you think that, just going back a little bit and thinking about Africa, that I know that you are familiar to, when you think about misinformation and the work that the professional journalist needs to battle against, what's the main key in Africa, or maybe here in Southern Africa, where we are now, when we talk about misinformation?
Yeah, I don't know that I could speak to that.
Okay.
I can speak to it more broadly, and certainly from the American context.
Yeah.
One of the challenges for journalists when we're taking on misinfo, disinfo, is we want to make sure we're not amplifying bad information. So there's something called the Barbara Streisand effect. Maybe you know.
Yeah. But you can explain. Okay. Yeah, I know. But
so the Barbara Streisand effect refers to an article published that gave away more information about Barbara Streisand's house than she wanted. But instead of leaving it alone, she made a big deal about it. And so in the end, more people knew about it than they did in the first place. So this is something that journalists think a lot about because we want to make sure that we're not inadvertently giving bad information more oxygen. Another thing is, tone, I think, is really important because sometimes misinformation or disinformation can have an emotional component. And it's not really our role to make people feel foolish. Sometimes really smart people fall for misinfo. And so if we can provide context around it, and even to the next step, the ideal is if we can figure out why someone is pushing misinfo or disinfo. That's super important because it can tell a more complete story to the audience.
Yeah. It's a kind of backlash that happens by Barbara Streisand because it's an auto backlash, provided by herself. And when I think about journalism, I think about process in a professional process.
Right.
Do you think it's important for an ordinary citizen know about how journalism works to be more careful when reading the news?
Yeah.
Like acquiring those skills for reading the news and understanding what he's reading.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because, even within the US context, there's a lot of norms that journalists have that I'm not sure an audience would understand. So, for instance, a good journalistic practice is we don't pay for interviews. And the reason why is you don't want there to be any question about why someone said what they said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that people really understand that. And so the question I think for journalists is like, how do we do a better job explaining that without being too boring or feeling like we're just talking about ourselves?
Yeah.
But I think, you see a lot of it with data visualization because it's using new technology. So those journalists are really, really good at saying, here's the tools we used, here's what this information can tell us, and here's what it can't. And I think those journalists are sort of like setting a very good example for the rest of us.
Good. And we had first talking about business model of professional journalism, where I think it's related to everything that we talked. We have a more decentralized tradition that got challenges for the professional journalism and the business model. And now we have AI working harder on it and making the scenario harder too.
Right.
What do you think is the future for that? I mean, in terms, what's the balance between we have the companies working on that, but we have the citizen also producing, and you have the tech companies also working on the same field almost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in some ways, American journalism has gone through a bunch of different eras. That's the journalism I know the best. And in some ways, there could be a really hopeful era with like more collaboration between journalistic platforms and audiences. That's like sort of the hopeful idea. And I think, we've seen a lot of examples where audiences have asked for journalists to be better and do better. And, I think that's really healthy.
Part of the process.
I think so. I mean, what journalists are doing is trying to provide reliable information for an informed citizenry, right? And if the citizenry is saying back to us, we need you to do a better job, that's really helpful. Yeah. And in many ways, I think since I've been in journalism since 2008, we have been more responsive, but we can continue to be more so.
So will professional journalism survive?
I think it has to.
Yeah.
I don't really understand how democracy and journalism can't work together. I mean, I don't know how journalism functions without democracy and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so I think it has to. I mean, sort of the model's challenging. The business model's challenging.
But there are other mock things that try to take the space of journalism in this balance of power and democracies. That the real threat and that journalism is suffering, I think, sometimes.
Sure. I mean, it's information is power, right? So, there will always be different actors trying to fill that space.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Thank you. That was great.